Welcome to Epic Moments in Gaming History, a series that takes a look at some of the most amazing and epic moments throughout the history of gaming. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
The year is 1996, and Resident Evil has just been released on the PlayStation, and it's about to change survival horror forever.
Resident Evil 1. Now there's a game that I'll never forget the first time I played it. The experience through it absolutely horrified me, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. Now when it first came out, I was still young, I was still gullible, and horror movies and horror novels even still scared me. So at the time it came out, I was still kind of excited to play it because I wanted to see if I could get scared by it, because, you know, I thought, well, this is a video game, it won't scare me. Oh, was I wrong? So my friend comes over, I didn't have a PlayStation, I didn't have Resident Evil, and all I knew was what the game was, or kind of what it was about. So even looking at the game cover, that the first long box PlayStation cover, it even scared me a little bit by looking at it, because this guy kind of looked creepy, and I knew he was going to be shooting zombies, which I was terrified of, thanks to Return of the Living Dead. So anyways, he picks Chris Redfield to walk through the mansion for the first time, which this mansion was huge, it was creepy, I'd never seen these kinds of landscapes or backgrounds or anything. He walks through the kitchen and goes into that first hallway where you see the zombie, and he turns his head, and you know, oh, and it freaked me out. And then we played through the rest of the mansion, and we got to the place where the sharks are, and by that time I'd had enough. I couldn't take it anymore. The game was horrifying to me, it was terrifying, it scared me to death. The music, the creepy atmosphere, the dogs, the crows, the little diaries that you could pick up and read, all this was an experience that absolutely horrified me as a kid. And I can still remember from this day my friend reading aloud one of those diaries that said, itchy, tasty, in reference to a man turning into a zombie slowly, itching himself, picking up his skin, and eating it. That was my first experience with Resident Evil, and it's not so scary today, but back then it was, but it's definitely worth checking out if you haven't. It's an amazing game, and it set the stage for all the horror games up until this day.
Man, I will never forget my first experience with the first Resident Evil game back in late 1996 or early 1997. I can't remember exactly when I first played it, but it changed my life forever because it made me the massive Resident Evil fan that I am today. And it's kind of funny, my first experience with the first game. I went down to a friend's house that lived down the street from me. We all have that gamer friend that has everything. And he had a PlayStation, and he had just gotten a long box copy of Resident Evil. And I remember seeing that and just being amazed by it. You know, you had this really creepy, eerie game with these scary camera angles where you couldn't quite see what was around the next corner. And I remember being blown away by the cutscenes. I know now that other games had FMV cutscenes at the time with live action actors and stuff, but this was my first experience seeing something like that. And I just remember being blown away by it, and, you know, the gore factor and the really creepy vibe of the game and everything. That first time you see the zombie and it's kind of eating the dead body, and it looks back at you and everything. And I remember being really fascinated by the game, but at the same time terrified. And I remember watching my friend play this game and just really being interested in, you know, observing the experience from a spectator's point of view. And at one point, my friend, he died. He got killed by a zombie or something. And then he kind of looks at me and, you know, passes me the controller. And he's like, "Hey, do you want to play?" And I'm like, "Heck no!" I think I was like 10 or 11 years old at the time. And I was terrified. I was interested in watching the game, but I was too terrified to play it. And obviously, you know, later on, you know, Resident Evil 2 came out, and that was my first time playing for myself a Resident Evil game. And I went back and played the first one. But that first experience was just me watching my friend and being too terrified to play the game myself.
So Resident Evil, I would say the epic moment for me is probably when the hunters actually entered the house. I was pretty terrified of them because I actually saw what the hunters could do to you. I mean, decapitation when your health is somewhat in moderate condition, that's pretty scary. So I actually did a scenario where you play as Chris Redfield if you leave his helper Rebecca in the house. leave her in the house, Rebecca becomes a target of the hunters. So I actually I heard her scream, and I paused the game for a minute. I was hella scared. Like, oh man, what's going on, man? I was hella scared. And then I went in and I challenged the hunter, and I came out on top, and I'll never forget it. I think I was about 3 seconds away from being decapitated, but I actually survived and saved her. So I actually helped me get the good ending later in the game, and I was really proud of myself. So that was an epic moment to me. And to celebrate, again, I'll have a little swig of Crystal Pepsi.
See, when I think of Resident Evil, I think of quintessential horror games at its finest. I remember playing the very first one. I think I was still in elementary and middle school, and I remember I'm like, my God, I can't get these tank controls down. But you know, it was one of the coolest, most unique games I'd ever played. The horror element was there in the fullest form. It was a ton of fun, and in my opinion, it got better. It got better with age, you know, as the series evolved, as the story evolved. It got better and better. 4 being one of my personal favorites from the series. 5, which I think is massively underrated. Unfortunately, I just wish 6 followed that suit, but really looking forward to the new one coming out. And yeah, that's why Resident Evil, in my opinion, is probably the #1 pick for me as best horror genre title.
Did you know that while Resident Evil received praise for its new take on survival horror, it was universally laughed at for its cheesy in-game dialogue and cutscenes?
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right. Barry, thanks for saving my life.
Oh, Resident Evil. Now, see, I have the distinct honor of being one of the ones who purchased Resident Evil on its launch day back in spring of '96, and I'd been following its development up until that point in the gaming magazines, and before that, I got really addicted to a survival horror game, before we used that term, called Alone in the Dark on the 3DO. So when I saw Resident Evil being developed, I was like, wow, here's a game that's obviously heavily influenced by Alone in the Dark, but also a lot of Hollywood horror movies. Count me in. So when the game came out, I know the one moment that got everyone excited was the scene when you're walking down the hallway and the dogs burst through the window. Fantastic scene, still probably the scariest moment in video game history. But for me, the scene that got me hooked on Resident Evil was the portrait puzzle room. You're in this tiny little hallway, very claustrophobic hallway, and there's all these portraits lined up along the wall with switches underneath them. And you have to figure out what switches to hit in what order by reading the description of the painting. And while you're doing this, there's this very ominous music playing in the background. And there's track lighting above you. And hanging out on that track lighting is a whole bunch of crows. And they're just watching you, occasionally ruffling their feathers, cawing once in a while. And the tension just was so crazy that there's something that snapped in my brain at that point. And I said, this is it. This is phenomenal. This is what I want to play.
Resident Evil was a game I first played at my friend's house. He had rented it for the night, and we were playing it, and we got to the part where the dog jumps through the window, and that scared us both to death. And jump scares were something new at the time, something that we had not really seen before. So that's one thing I always remember about Resident Evil was the dog that jumped through the window and the jump scare that came with that. But not only that, the ambience of the house and just the creepy feeling you get in the house, walking around and exploring, and the way the door opens up and you're just like, what's on the other side, you know? Resident Evil forever changed the survival horror genre as we know it, or maybe it even created it. It's hard to say. I mean, you can make that argument. Thank you for watching this episode of Epic Moments in Gaming History. If you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to check out the YouTube channels listed in the description.
Oh, and happy Halloween.